thank you all for joining us in this virtual gathering. In partnership with the Washington University Alumni Association and the McKelvey School of Engineering, Chancellor Martin and I are really honored to introduce to all of you Jim McKelvey as the featured speaker for today's webinar. As a 1987 graduate of Washington University, Jim's entrepreneurial activities have now spanned 4 decades. In fact, while still a student, Jim's entrepreneurial spirit of problem solving caused him to publish his first of his 3 textbooks. As an entrepreneur, business person, and philanthropist, Jim McKelvey might be best known for co-founding Square, the mobile payment system that enables small businesses to run their storefronts on a mobile device. Since 2009, Square has grown to more than 2,500 employees and a $25 billion valuation. Jim's endeavors also include LaunchCode, a nonprofit aimed at solving the problem of a talent shortage by creating a pathway for people seeking careers in technology. He's the co-founder of Third Degree Glass Factory, one of the nation's premier centers for glassblowing arts, right here on Del Mar. And he founded Mirror Digital Publishing, an early digital technology startup. Jim's newest project, Invisibly, addresses the world's need for quality content through an attention economy, which sustainably monetizes digital content, improves consumer and marketer experiences online. And in 2017, in recognition of his insights into financial systems and his stature in the St. Louis business community, Jim was appointed as an independent director of the St. Louis Federal Reserve. Today's conversation will focus on Jim's most recent accomplishment, being an author. He recently published The Innovation Stack, a business narrative that provides a first-person look into the world of entrepreneurship. In particular, he focuses on solving what he terms a perfect problem by innovating to build a resilient, world-changing company. Here at WashU, Jim has also had a transformative impact. In 2019, Jim and his wife, Anna, made an unprecedented investment in our school, and in recognition of which it was renamed the James McKelvey School of Engineering. That historic milestone reaffirmed the university's aim of tackling the world's great engineering challenges with renewed vigor, as well as impacting the future of many students with really an overwhelming commitment to scholarship support. Prior to the naming gift, Jim, Anna, and the entire McKelvey family made outstanding contributions in advancing the university, transforming the campus with the addition of the James M. McKelvey Senior Hall, which will open January 21. Sitting as the James McKelvey Senior Professor, it is only fitting that I mention Jim's father, James McKelvey Sr. He was an alumnus and an iconic former dean of the engineering school who provided so much dedication to Washington University. We are grateful to Jim for his leadership and his investment, which continues and expands the significant contributions the McKelvey family has made to the university. Jim, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Dean Bobick.
At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Chancellor Andrew Martin, who will moderate the conversation. He was appointed Washington University's 15th chancellor by the Board of Trustees in July 2018, began his tenure in 2019, and was formally inaugurated this past fall. Of course, nothing much has happened on campus since he began. Chancellor Martin returned to Washington University from the University of Michigan, where from 2014 to 2018, he served as Dean of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. Prior to his short exile to Michigan, he served on WashU's faculty in various positions, including as the Charles Nagel Chair of Constitutional Law and Political Science at the School of Law, Vice Dean of the School of Law, Founding Director of the Center of Empirical Research in the Law, and Chair of the Department of Political Science in Arts and Sciences. Chancellor Martin earned his PhD in Political Science from Washington University in 1998, and his AB degrees from College of William and Mary in both mathematics and government in 1994. Chancellor Martin continues the tradition of bringing our community together and planning for the future while harnessing the momentum of the university's past leaders. All please join me in welcoming Jim McKelvey and Chancellor Andrew Martin.
Thank you so much, Dean Bobick. I appreciate it very much. I'm sorry that I'm not able to see you in person. I do have the luxury of living a few houses down the block from Dean Bobick, so I have had a chance to see him here and there over the last couple of months. And Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. So first things first, congratulations on the book, The Innovation Stack, Building an Unbeatable Business, One Crazy Idea at a Time, was published this spring. In fact, just days before COVID-19 started having a real impact in the United States. A great timing. So first, can you tell us a little bit about the book, and then tell us about how the pandemic impacted your ability to promote the book?
So I think I picked the best topic I possibly could have, and the worst day in a century to launch it. It launched on March 10th, which was the sort of day they decided to shut down the world. So I was in New York for the book launch, and there was none. But interestingly, the subject of the book, which is entrepreneurship and doing stuff that hasn't been done before, is a situation that I honestly thought would appeal to maybe 10% of the population. Because I talk about chaotic worlds, I talk about situations where you just don't know what the right answer is and how this impacts, business and people. And I expected very few people to be interested in that sort of level of chaos. And then all of a sudden, the whole world is thrown into that. So I picked the right topic and the wrong time. And ironically, in the book, there was a chapter on timing. So I clearly don't know what I'm talking about.
And so how many webinars have you done in the last 2.5 months?
Oh my God, probably 30. It's, everything's shut down. So this is how we communicate. And I was sort of laughing at Susan's misery at launching this thing because, boy, I know what that's like. I knew Susan when she was Susan Lipsitz, and just looking at that pained, terrified look on her face when the tech is going wrong and everything's going live. Yeah, I've been there. But I mean, we're all living in this world today, and we're making the best of it.
So at the really highest level, what do you want the reader to gain from the experiences that you've had, the successes you've had, but also the mistakes that you've made?
So first of all, the book's not about me. I do a little bit of first-person storytelling because I think it's relevant to serve the narrative. But what I was really trying to do was explain this phenomenon that I saw that I couldn't explain. It was a very, very powerful phenomenon. And it's sort of it's the antidote to the hero myth. So if we think about, sort of the great entrepreneurs, the great sort of leaders and visionaries, we think of these sort of larger than life figures. And in my research, and actually in interviews with some of these people, I found that it was just the opposite. These were, sort of normal folks in sort of abnormally harsh conditions. And that combination with the right chemistry creates these world-changing enterprises. And what I had thought previously was sort of for people who were, smarter and bolder and younger and stronger than me, it turns out that's not the case. And so in the book, what I really did was I laid out a pretty scientific explanation as to what I think happened at Square and how that same pattern has repeated throughout history and how it is in fact a phenomenon, not just a bunch of, sort of sample bias.
Mm-hmm. So is that why it was important to write the book? I mean, that you've done the analysis, you found a pattern that you thought was useful to share with the world, or was there something deeper than that in terms of your motivation?
I published my last real book when I was at WashU as an undergrad, and that was sort of brutal. I didn't want to write another book, but I wanted to answer a question about how Square was able to survive an attack by Amazon. So for those of you who don't know, Amazon copied Square's product when we were still a startup. They undercut our price by 30%, and then the Amazon brand name, they added the Amazon brand name. And everyone just expected Square to die because when Amazon does that to any company that's a startup, that company dies. And they did this to Square and we survived. As a matter of fact, we not only survived, but a year later, Amazon gave up and they actually mailed one of these little Square readers to all of their former customers. They basically said, we're out of credit cards, use Square, which was amazing. But after it happened, I felt like somebody who'd been, like thrown out of an airplane with no parachute and survived the fall. And so I had to explain the phenomenon. And so I went on this basically 2-year research quest to look for other companies that had had the same thing happen. And it turns out there are a lot of them. Like throughout history, there are companies that have had extremely harsh circumstances and have ended up being essentially world dominating companies. And I saw this pattern and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Maybe I have something here that's worth sharing. But then, training as an engineer, I recognize selection bias, right? So you can prove anything if you're willing to study history and just choose the examples that support your theory. So what I needed to do was find somebody who'd lived through it. And unfortunately, most of my historical examples were dead people. So I found Herb Kelleher. So Herb was a founder of Southwest Airlines, and I called up Herb and I told him what I was doing, and he agreed to meet with me in Texas. So I flew down to Dallas and I spent a day with this guy who's a legend. And Southwest Airlines lived through a lot of the same stuff that Square lived through, except they did it in the airline industry. And I said, Herb, like, am I right? Like, is this something that the world needs to hear? And Herb got super excited. And he says, you need to write a book. You need to do this. You need to, you need to basically tell the world. So with Herb sort of giving me permission to tell the story, I went out and I made a really dumb decision. I decided to not tell the story as text. I did a graphic novel. So I did like a comic book and the whole thing, because these are epic stories. I mean, there's a building burning, there's a guy getting murdered, like, it's just, these are great stories. So I made a graphic novel, and I told Herb, it took me about a year to do that, and showed the draft to Herb, and he hated it. And he's like, I want no part of your comic book. He's like, you're taking a very serious subject and you're treating it in a trivial way. So Herb Kelleher, who I totally respected, sort of both talked me into the book and then talked me out of the first idea that I had. So now it exists as basically a text, but I felt it was an empowering story and one that should be told, because I wish somebody had told me this when I was young.
Well, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the book is you didn't select on the dependent variable, right? I mean, you were looking carefully to find, to really be able to do the inference that you'd like to draw. And you can't learn anything about success by looking at people who are successful. If you don't have the contrast, if you don't have the failures, you really can't learn anything. And I think that as a social scientist who's a methodologist and a data scientist, that warms my heart. So I've had the chance to write a few things in my day. In fact, the book that I published about the same time that you did, it came out a couple of months ago, took me over 10 years and was one of the most painful professional experiences of my life. So tell me about what it was like to write this book. Did you ever want to give it up? How did you keep going? And what was your writing process like?
It was brutal. The book's in its 8th draft. So I wrote the thing. Well, first of all, it's a graphic novel because I had this great idea, and then Herb sort of quelled that, and then I rewrote it and rewrote it. It took me 3 years. And then I finally felt like I had something that was readable, something that was enjoyable, because I hate business books. I don't know if you've ever read these things, but they're just penalties. They're just like it's getting like really nasty homework assignment to have somebody hand you a business book. And so I didn't want to put another body on that pile. So I really tried to write something that I would enjoy reading, first of all, as a guy who likes to read. And I'm a very slow writer, so it took forever. But the process really got weird, actually after publication. So I went through this 8 iteration pass, and iteration 7 was the one that I handed to the publisher. Or I'm sorry, iteration 6 was the one I handed to the publisher, and they beat it up and they edited it and did all that stuff, and I was done. And we had the proof copies, and I gave a copy to my dad to read, and I said, Dad, this is what's going to be published. I'd like your opinion. And he read the whole thing, and he said, so the book has 3 sections, and he said, Jimmy, I really like the first 2 sections of your book. And that was just, my father. I was like, what about the 3rd section? And basically the 3rd section was not great. So I had to rewrite it. And I was actually in the hospital with my father, who was, basically dying in the hospital. And I rewrote the last section of the book in Dad's hospital room. So it was brutal. I mean, writing it was brutal. I was so happy to get it published, and then I picked literally the worst day in a century to launch a book. So here we are, webinars and whatnot.
All right. So do you have another one in you, or is this it?
I mean, if I find another pattern like this, I mean, again, this was something that I felt sort of weird keeping to myself, because, you know, what I've always been taught about entrepreneurs and people who are super successful is that they're somehow different than the rest of us. They're smarter or wiser, you know, anything. And that's just really not the case. It's this power that they harness. And it's this, more than that, it's a power that's actually very simple. Because if you look at all these companies that have literally changed the world, they're not trying to be big, fancy, you know, show off ventures. They're trying to serve little people. They're trying to serve the masses. They're trying to serve the underserved, the people who've been ignored forever. So people who rode Southwest Airlines were people who were coming off Greyhound buses, and people who first banked at the Bank of Italy, which became Bank of America, and then at one point the largest bank in the world. These were people who had no relationships with banks. And, you know, Square was processing credit cards for people who'd never processed credit cards. This pattern repeats and repeats. And I was like, I got to share this. So yeah, I felt like I had to, and I'll do it again. If I stumble on anything this good again, I'll probably subject myself to another 3 years of ritual beatings.
So, you know, as you think about our Washington University students that are that may be listening around the world, you know, who are thinking about entrepreneurship, and particularly entrepreneurship today, at the beginning of a recession, in the middle of a pandemic, you know, what are the sorts of things that you would have liked to know when you began your entrepreneurial journey? What are the sorts of things that you'd like to share with our students?
Well, first, since this is a quasi-academic setting, I'd like to start with a definitional exercise, which is the word entrepreneurship has changed in definition over the last century. The word originally was used by Joseph Schumpeter, the economist, to differentiate people who did weird new things from regular business people. So regular business people were doing stuff that had already been done. So you want to set up an accounting firm or open a coffee shop or, you know, do something that had already been done in society, you know, open a restaurant. You would be called a business person 100 years ago. If you did something crazy, like trying to build a flying machine, which at the time nobody had ever done, they would call you an entrepreneur. So an entrepreneur is trying to build this thing that flies, but humankind has never flown before. And that's what entrepreneurship was. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, then you're very, very lonely, because almost all of the resources these days are targeted towards the new definition of entrepreneur, which includes every business there is. And most businesses are just copies of other businesses with, you know, incremental improvements. So what I would say first to the people is, you probably, if you just want to make money, should be a business person. That's going to make you more money statistically than being an entrepreneur. However, if you do choose to be an entrepreneur and solve a problem that was unsolved, you are going to have a radically different experience than a business person. And if you are successful, probably a success that is 3 or 4 orders of magnitude larger than you would have if you were just trying to solve a problem that others have already solved. And your second question, which is, like, we got a worldwide pandemic. This is actually an advantage. Now, not in absolute terms, like it would probably be better if the world wasn't shut down, but in relative terms, the shutdown is causing chaos. And it's causing chaos disproportional to, well, I'm sorry, the chaos is proportional to the level of sophistication of the business. So if you have a business that's pre-COVID-19 was running really well, and you just had it down, and it was just doing the thing that it needed to do, and then the world shuts down, your business is probably suffering disproportionately. So you went from here to here. One of the patterns that I noticed with these world-changing companies is that almost every one of them started in a terribly chaotic environment. Biggest bank in the world, launched by a guy who was a produce vendor in San Francisco a year before the great San Francisco earthquake. So you think COVID-19 was bad, but we didn't lose a third of the population and make another third homeless in one day. I mean, as bad as things are, it was worse in San Francisco during the Great Quake. IKEA, basically in the aftermath of World War II and a bunch of other sort of social upheaval, becomes the biggest furniture company in the world. And I don't doubt that there are going to be great companies formed in this chaotic environment, because there's something about chaos that it doesn't necessarily favor the entrepreneur, but it makes them less disfavored than everybody else. So it's a relative advantage.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's about adaptability, I think, right?
Yeah, you have to be adaptable because you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before. Most of the time, it's not going to work.
Right. So how is Square innovating in the midst of the pandemic?
Oh my God. So we're releasing new products almost on a daily basis. So I was happy to learn, actually this morning, I was talking, I was doing a book club thing, and it turns out the book club, the LA Times Festival of Books, which has now been completely shut down, is now doing an online store that they put together in a week using Square, like from zero to fully functioning online store in a week. And what we've been doing is just cranking out tools because we have millions of customers and they're telling us what they need. And so we're distributing money through the PPP program, through our various payment rails. We're helping banks and financial institutions in ways that we can. We're cranking out products because a lot of the pain and suffering is at the smallest levels of business, and they just need tools. So we've been giving these tools away and producing them at record speed. So I'm super proud of the company just serving its customers.
So in addition to Square, you have a new venture, invisibly.com, formed here in St. Louis. Can you tell those here in attendance a little bit about that business and what you're up to?
So I'll tell you, it's another entrepreneurial venture, which is to say it hasn't been done before and right now doesn't work. The central idea of Invisibly is that we should, as individuals, have control over how media is produced and consumed. And we've all basically lost that control. In the old days, well, I won't go into the economics of it, but basically your eyeballs are being bought and sold without your permission or knowledge. And that's bad for a bunch of reasons. But one of them is that you don't have the ability as a consumer to pay more for great stuff and less for crap. And because of this, we have a business model in the world that tends to create crap. So fake news is a good example of something that's cheap to create. It's more entertaining than real news because I'm not constrained by things like facts, and it actually sells. So if that's the thing that sells, and I'm only going to make a certain amount of money per, couple of pennies for advertising, why not create a, cheap, bad product? And you say, well, I don't want a cheap, bad product. And I say, well, unfortunately, Andrew, you don't have any way to pay more for good stuff, because advertising and subscription supported content can only be monetized per minute. And we don't want to consume stuff per minute because that makes things long and like as long as this answer. And we don't want that. We want short, punchy stuff, well edited.
Mm-hmm. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about St. Louis. Of course, Square has a huge presence here in St. Louis. Why St. Louis as opposed to another tech hub like San Francisco, Boston, or New York?
So I like you to say another tech hub. I don't think we're actually a tech hub yet. I mean, we really weren't. And the reason Square wasn't founded in St. Louis or grew in St. Louis was because 10 years ago, when Jack and I started it, there was not enough talent in the city to support what we were doing, which is one of the reasons I started LaunchCode. Actually, the main reason I started LaunchCode. Yep. But as far as St. Louis goes, look, both Jack and I are from St. Louis. We wanted to do something in our hometown, but this is not our largest office. We have bigger operations in, I can name half a dozen cities.
Sure.
But I want to change that because the talent pool in St. Louis is exceptional. And the ability for a growing company like Square to have a big pool of talent is really a material advantage. So we're spending quite a bit of money downtown to fix up the old Post-Dispatch building and create literally the coolest office space that Square has. And we spent $60 million on our office in San Francisco, and we're going to outdo it here in St. Louis. It is going to be spectacular. And people who come in and work with us, assuming anyone ever comes back to the office, are just going to feel great. It is going to be an inspiring space. It's tied to the history of St. Louis and the Post, but it's also something that I just really wanted to see in my hometown.
So on that topic, I mean, you and I have had a number of conversations about cross-sector collaboration, ways in which the university healthcare systems and the like can really come together to address disparities and some of the problems that we're facing in our community, and also to help drive equitable economic growth. As you think about the places where Washington University has invested, something, Cortex Innovation District as one of them, as you think about the path forward, particularly at this moment in time, what role do you see for universities? What role do you see for business? And what are the ways in which we can work together to uplift the region of St. Louis that we're also committed to?
Well, you've already done one of them, which is you turned WashU from a school that always sort of had walls around it to a school that's part of St. Louis now. And that has not been our history forever. We have always, at least when, my time on campus as an undergraduate, the students came to WashU, spent 4 years, and then went home. And opening up our resources and engaging with the community, Cortex being a great example, the medical school being a great example, but a lot of the work the Brown School is doing, the various campuses that we have, that's opening up this literally world-class institution to the region that it lives in, So, I mean, there's some pretty famous colleges that are sort of enemies of their town. And I don't think WashU is well served by that. And I think you're doing fantastically, Frank, a fantastic job sort of changing that. And your scholarship is just the first thing. Like if you live locally, you can attend. Wow, that's a big deal.
Great. Well, thanks, Jim. So we have a ton of questions in the Q&A, and so I'm going to kick things back to our colleague, Susan Cohen, who is going to ask us some questions. Welcome back, Susan.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for your patience at the beginning. As Jim mentioned, we definitely go back quite a ways. So it's been really great to be able to have the honor to work on this interview with him. So we did receive many questions in advance as people were registering for the event. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function and we'll get through as many as we can in the next 20 minutes or so. So Jim, I'm going to go ahead and launch with some of these questions that we received. Do you think that technology leaders have a responsibility to address social and political issues? And if so, how do we incentivize more companies to do this, as they may be concerned with shareholders, customer outrage, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't just limit it to technology leaders. I think anyone who's a leader in anything should lead. I mean, and part of that is taking a risk of saying stuff that might be unpopular or doing things that might be unpopular. And then sometimes the crowd falls in behind you and cheers your name. And other times they short your stock and flame you on Twitter. But I think that's the risk. And if you're, let's differentiate people who have been extremely successful and are sort of rich and powerful from leaders, because you can get a lot of money and stature and not actually do much leading. It takes a lot of risk and personal courage to be able to, sort of say what you believe, even before it becomes generally popular. So I wouldn't just limit that to tech execs. I would say that anybody who has, strong views and a platform probably is well served to share those, and hopefully in a constructive way. But there's going to be some risk.
So speaking of risk, another question we received was, do you think risk-taking is a skill that can be learned?
Parts of it can. So risk-taking is this weird thing. It's actually easier to do for some people if they know they're doing it, and it's easier for others to do if they don't know they're doing it. So if and you kind of want to know where you are on that line. You know, like in my case, like I'm usually better if I don't know how risky or stupid something actually is. Like if I knew all the stuff that was going to go wrong at the beginning of most of the stuff that I do, I would probably not do it. So I'm sort of better served by ignorance. But then there's, you know, there's a different personality that's sort of better served by information. Like, you know, tell me all the things that can possibly go wrong and let me sort of mentally prepare for this. But, you know, whatever camp you're in, you might want to either read more or read less.
Okay, here's another question we received in advance. So one alum asked or said, at WashU, I had a professor who talked about teaching children to be solid citizens. Is there one thing you would recommend for us to do to demonstrate by our actions that we believe in the value of solid citizens?
I don't even know what a solid citizen is, but I'll just sort of guess that that's probably a good citizen who votes and generally supports the world. And I don't know that, you know, teaching that works, because I'm a parent. So I'm kind of more answer as a parent than as a, you know, than as just sort of an adult. People learn differently, you know. Leading by example is probably the easiest thing to do if you set a good example. But even then you have people that rebel against their parents and do the opposite. You know, like we're trying to get my son to practice the violin. He's probably never going to play that instrument as soon as we stop beating on him to do so. And the other thing is, I always worry when we start talking about, you know, teaching citizenship and teaching things like, you know, is it good behavior to do something? And you say, well, it's probably good behavior to vote, right? And I think that's probably good. I would say that most people are in favor of voting, but like maybe there's a situation where that's bad. Or maybe the way we teach people to vote is wrong. So I don't think I'm qualified to answer that any more than just a guy with an opinion. And probably my opinion is, it's probably half baked. So sorry, so far out of my comfort zone that I recognize I'm just another babbling idiot.
Then we'll go on to the next question. So we actually had a number of people submit some questions regarding technology and access to technology. You've created LaunchCode, which is such an amazing organization. How do we make sure that the underprivileged have access to technology in 2020 and going forward? What else can we be doing? Well,
the LaunchCode model works, and it's a pretty simple thing. We give free education, and then we couple it with real jobs. So the key to LaunchCode is the job. So people think of LaunchCode as a training operation. It's not really a training operation. It's a job placement operation. You can come to LaunchCode, and if you've got the skills, we don't run you through any training. We just say, oh, here, Susan, we're going to get you this job. But the formula works really, really well because we take advantage of some efficiencies in education that we can get because we have, you know, sort of access to free courseware and then a lot of volunteers. And then we're also able, because we don't charge anything, to fail a lot of people. So we don't just, hey, welcome to LaunchCode and we're going to guarantee that you're going to graduate. We wash out a significant portion of our class, which means that the portion that does get through is actually valued by the employers. So one of the things that I think has been a secret at LaunchCode is not asking for any favors. So LaunchCode is, by any measure, placing greater diversity on age, gender, race, like any sort of underrepresented group you want to measure. LaunchCode's just way at the top of placing people in programming jobs with those, you know, attributes. And the reason we do it so well, I think, is because we never sell on the fact that, you know, gender or age or race. We don't talk about any of that. It's purely a discussion of talent. And if you're talking about a system that's trying to get people hired, what I discovered personally is that talking about how much you're helping the individual turns off the employer, and it shouldn't. And I wish we didn't live in a world where that was the case, but I've got the statistics to prove that that happens. So we don't talk about diversity or gender equality or age discrimination or anything like that. We just talk about the raw talent that a person has and let that be the determination of whether or not they get the job. And that seems to work really well. And that's something that that might be more generally applicable.
Well, as Jim knows, a little bit of a personal note, I'm a very big fan of LaunchCode as my husband went through it. So talked to Jim about it a number of times. So we know so much of what it is doing for the community. So thank you for that.
Well, thank your husband, because like he's actually helping the whole region and the company he works for. Put it this way, they're not giving him a job because he deserves a job or because they like him or any of that. There's no favor there. That is pure greed. That is greed working. So yeah.
So another question actually kind of related to LaunchCode as well. For new business ideas, the entrepreneur has one or more significant hurdles to overcome or barriers to entry. Have you ever considered creating a business incubator like MADE or LaunchCode, but not so specific, where you'd be providing expertise in many areas in exchange for equity?
So we kind of did that with 630, which was trying to harness the power of fintech companies, so St. Louis has a regional advantage in financial technologies because we're sort of second to New York in the number of companies that are based here that are in the financial world. And so we thought we'd double down on that. And it didn't really work that well. I mean, it's okay, but it's not been the runaway success because it turns out as the companies start growing, they just move to other regions that have more money. So we're gonna try that again, only this time we're gonna be the region that has more money. So more to come on that one. But as far as, just an incubator, I think that would be an appropriate thing to do once we sort of restart an ecosystem. So that's probably going to be something that I do work on. Yes.
So we had a couple of questions actually about books. One person asked, what are 3 books you would recommend everyone read and why? So any recommendations?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Great story. I'm currently reading The Broken Heart of America, which is a tragic tale about how St. Louis got into some of its problems. And it's a book I would recommend you having read, but I would not recommend you reading it because it's just brutal. And then, my God, there's so many great ones. Anything by Churchill.
So I'm going to take a couple of the questions that are coming in through the Q&A right now. What do you see emerging in terms of entrepreneurialism if there is a shift towards data science and away from computer science? What does LaunchCode look like for data science? Any ideas?
So people don't understand really what data science is. I mean, I think Andrew does, and I think Aaron does. I think we've got 2 people on who actually understand it. But what actually sells as data science is what we used to call statistics. Like if you look at the job market, like what people are calling data, we use artificial intelligence. No. That's called statistics. There's a big disconnect between sort of cutting edge machine learning data science and what like a business needs to figure out what sort of ad to run in your face. So it's not that sophisticated right now. And what I mean by that is you can come into LaunchCode and we'll train you up to use enough of the buzzwords and math to get a job. And then if you want to do sort of the high-end stuff, you pretty much do what everybody else has done in the history of computer science, which is, take some classes and learn more. But all the resources are available. But I don't think we're going to have too much trouble keeping up with the trends because LaunchCode has, even since I founded it, changed its curriculum probably every 6 months on average. And that's just to keep up with the job market because we're not a training program, because we are basically a job placement program. Every time the world comes up with something called Pega or whatever, like, oh, what the hell's Pega? I don't know, but companies want Pega programmers. Okay, we got to train them. So we just keep iterating. It's just baked into our DNA.
I probably should have noted that that was from a McKelvey faculty member, that last question.
Oh, damn. Okay, softball. Sorry.
Next time I'll give you that in advance.
No, I don't want to know.
So another question that we just received, how has your experience as an artist influenced your career as an entrepreneur and leader in the world of business and tech, and vice versa? Do you see any direct relationships between the two?
Well, I mean, first, it's made me really cheap. You know, like I didn't earn enough money for a long time as an artist, so I developed these really crazy frugal habits. And they sort of percolate through my life all the time, and people make fun of me now. But the second thing about art is that because it is one of the few fields where original thinking is valued, it's an interesting place to form ideas. And what I mean by that is, like, if you, let's say you want to be an accountant, okay? Fantastically valuable profession, but we don't want you being original as an accountant. Like, we don't want the way you add up a column of numbers to somehow differ from the way, you know, someone else is going to add up a column of numbers. Like, we want conformity there. Same thing, you know, with most professions. But in art, if what you're doing is too similar to what other people have done, you're rejected. So it's sort of a good training space for an entrepreneur who, by definition, is going to have to confront problems that have not been solved and has to probably consider solutions that nobody else has thought of before. So in that way, it is sort of helpful. The other thing that I personally love about it is that, you know, going into the studio and making a physical object is just incredibly satisfying. And literally yesterday, I was in the studio all day with David Levy, who, you know, another WashU connection there, one of the best glass blowers in the country. And he and I spent all day trying to make a drinking glass, just trying to make a glass you know, pour a fifth of gin into. And that's super interesting to just physically make a product.
So I told Jim that I was probably going to throw in a few softball questions that we received in advance. So there's 3 right here, and then we'll start to wrap up. So the first one is, I'm assuming this is from one of your classmates, Jim. How come you haven't aged?
Because camera technology keeps getting better. No, I'm old. I just, what I haven't done is I haven't figured out how to eat right. So I'm not making this up. I skipped lunch today because I had so many meetings. I forgot to eat lunch. I'm at my office and we're cleaned out of snacks. So I have literally eaten today, like we usually have nuts in the office, but there's no nuts anymore. So I ate nut dust. You know, that sort of dust that collects, like that was the only thing I could eat. So it's just bad habits. So I haven't gained weight is the thing. Nut
okay, that's the answer. The next one, do you recall in the fall of 1985, which dorm suite you lived in?
Shepley. Oh, wait. 85? No, I would have been out of Shepley and living in the Sig Ep house, which has since been and should have been bulldozed.
And finally, I was debating whether or not to ask you this from somebody who I think you know quite well. So there might be some sort of history behind this. Have you ever tried kiteboarding?
Never successfully. I tried it. I blew my MCL and it was a disaster. But I'm willing to try it again. I just need, I probably need lessons. It seems so cool, but I was limping for a year after my first effort at kiteboarding. But yeah,
okay,
some of us go, here, put it, let me just throw this out there. I will buy all the equipment. I will fly wherever you want. If somebody could teach me how to do that damn sport. But I don't want to learn down in Mexico where they tried to teach me the first time and I almost lost my leg.
On that note, I'm going to go a couple more questions, probably on the more serious side. Is there a way, and this just came in via the Q&A, is there a way for innovation and regulation to coexist? With your experience at the Fed, you may have a unique take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So people think that regulation is innovation killing, and it's not. It's like we need rules. We need to know what the lines are. And at Square, we broke some of those rules and complied with most of them. We initially broke a lot of them, and then we got compliant with them. So look, I think regulation, especially if it's clear, is incredibly helpful. So I'm not a, laissez-faire, let everybody just let chaos reign, because in many cases that doesn't work. And especially in situations like, touching money, like you just don't want anybody to set up their own bank. You don't want anybody to set up their own brokerage. Like you want rules and regulations, and that's really good. It's helpful if they're clear and consistent and things like that. But yeah, humans are not great at consistency over time.
Okay, we're going to do about 2 or 3 more questions. So this one came in advance. Today's world of tech is becoming increasingly dominated by the major players, Google, Facebook, Amazon. Given your experience with Square, what advice do you have for future entrepreneurs who will undoubtedly need to prepare their companies to compete with these large tech incumbents?
So I would say if you start off with the idea that you're going to compete with one of these large tech companies initially, that's probably a bad idea, going at them directly. But there are so many places where these companies do not serve. And find one of those, and then you have the space to yourself. Like, by the time Amazon attacked Square, we had already been in business for 4 years, which meant that our innovation stack had evolved to the point where it offered us protection against literally the scariest company on the planet. I mean, I don't think any company is worse than Amazon if they're going to come after you. But you can say the same thing about Google or Apple or Facebook or any of these, sort of behemoths. But like, are you going to launch another social networking platform? Well, that might be a long shot. But are you going to find something that Facebook didn't do properly, or that Facebook does too well? Like Facebook was really good at preserving stuff you said and did. And so Snapchat came around and said, well, some of the stuff that I say and do, I don't want preserved, So they came up with this other thing. And then, so I wouldn't go at them directly, but I also wouldn't, I would basically just ignore them. Here's the thing. I don't start any effort by looking at the companies out there and saying, I have to compete with these people. What I do is I look for a problem and I say, what's the solution to this problem? And if the problem has not been solved by a major tech company, fine. And if it has, well, then there's no problem. So I have to look for another problem. But if you look for a problem, like everything's clear. And again, this is the thing I go through in the book, because it is absolutely overwhelming if you sit there and say, I have to start a business. It has to be original. I have to think of something that's going to have high growth and viral growth and all this crap. And you'll just die ingesting all these variables, which you can't properly parse. But problems are easy to find. You see something that pisses you off, see something that is an injustice and inequity, something that's wrong, and then strive to solve that. Well, there's probably going to be a lot of other people that want that solution as well. And many of them will pay you for that solution. It's a magical formula.
I'm going to take a question from a student, actually, who just wrote in. It looks like we have some students watching. Saying, I'm a WashU engineering student. I'm currently studying mechanical engineering, and I eventually want to be an entrepreneur. Do you think it's necessary for an engineer to earn a business-related degree, or just take a few business courses while focusing more on engineering?
Nah, you can ignore the business school. I did. I took one accounting class. I got a D. I'm not saying I'm the product. Now, look, if you're going to do a business that everybody else has done, yeah, go to the business school. The business school will train you how to copy other people's businesses, right? And that's going to make a lot of money. So if your definition of entrepreneur is you want to go do something that's already been done, the business school is a great education, If you want to do something that hasn't been done, then I think engineering education is going to have an advantage, because engineers are typically not focused on stuff that works. We're focused on stuff that doesn't work. How do we make this thing work? If it works, well, we publish it and that's that, and you can download it and figure it out. But the engineer just in the way they're trained, is going to confront more unsolved problems. So if you want to be an entrepreneur in the archaic definition, which is the one I use, you know, in my life and in the book, then I think you want to have an education where you are constantly confronting problems that at least your little team doesn't know how to solve, and you have to figure out how to solve the problem and then organize the team and do that. Like, one of the things I learned in the engineering school was how to work on teams of people that were much smarter than me. And so I would strongly recommend, if you want to be an entrepreneur in the traditional sense, in the historical sense, then engineering education is very, very helpful.
So here's a little bit of a follow-up to that. Why do so many companies claim to crave innovation, yet when presented with a new product idea or creative way of doing things, they demand 3 examples of where it's worked before?
Well, because they don't have the definitions right. Yeah, that's the same thing I get when, like when I was publishing this book, HarperCollins refused to even read the book because it didn't have a checklist in it of how to solve the problem. And I was like, wait, I'm talking about solving unsolved problems. How many how many steps are on that checklist? And they had an answer for that. The answer was 5 to 7. We need 5 to 7. It's like, fewer than 5, you haven't done your research right. More than 7, you're gonna lose your audience. I was like, oh, okay, so you guys have this formula. So like, good. Just, they're just not these simple answers. But we crave simple answers, and we sort of glorify people who give us simple answers, but it's just not how the stuff works.
So I'm going to do one final question. I'm going to read this verbatim here. Jim, suppose you have convinced the Time Lords to add 5 hours to a day, creating a metric day. How do you spend those 5 extra hours? Doing art, inventing, spending time with your family?
Oh, so I actually know how to do that. So it's called a don't do list. Like, if you eliminate consciously from your days the stuff that you shouldn't be doing or don't want to be doing, which I started doing 20 years ago, you'll get back a massive amount of time. So in my case, no social media. I get back a massive chunk of time. No news. I get back a massive chunk of, so you can actually do that. In my case, I think I wouldn't be doing a thing differently. I mean, I would probably be spending some time, with friends and family, but I actually have a lot of time I get to spend with friends and family. I would probably do a little bit more on problems, but I get to spend a lot, like I have this massive amount of time. What people don't understand is that if you avoid doing things that just suck up massive amounts of time, you end up with a ton of time. And I hate to admit that I never wake up to an alarm. I have large chunks of time where I have nothing to do. So it wouldn't make that much difference in my world. And the way to do that is just make a don't do list and just ruthlessly prune the things you shouldn't be doing or don't want to do.
Great advice. Thank you. With that, I'm going to bring this to an end. Thank you so much for your time today, Dean Bobick, Chancellor Martin. It has been a pleasure being with all of you and everyone who has joined us online this afternoon. We look forward to seeing everyone during a future program. If you have suggestions for speakers you'd like to hear, please email us at alumniassociation.worcester.edu. Again, we hope to have a lineup throughout the course of the summer and the early fall of our Wednesdays with WashU. And here is also the email address for you. And we also encourage you to visit our digital resources website, where we have been providing a lot of opportunities on ways you can connect during these times with alumni, students, and faculty. And the page is updated regularly. So again, thank you all very much.
And thank you, Jim, for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you,
Susan.
Susan.
Thanks,
Take care.